Happy International Women's Day. Welcome to a conversation about how feminism should save the world. I'm here with my colleagues to have a conversation about where we are right now. Last November, we had an unprecedented number of women and women of color get elected to Congress. We have at least 5 women already declared run for the presidency in the US. And so the conversation we're going to have today is really, if we, the 4 of us, were advisors to these candidates, what would we tell them, and what are the kind of policies we would like to see them put forward as president? I'm going to start, Ejim, with you. And any ideas of a particular thing on domestic policy that you want to focus on? You want them to focus on?
Yes. Well, let's see. If I were their advisor, I would say, first and foremost, take a cue from what's been happening and be bold and unapologetic. So what did we see this last week? We just saw passage of the most significant gun control legislation in the last 2 decades coming out of the House of Representatives. Yeah. And talk about a real emergency that we have in this country is gun violence. Last year we had over 307 mass shootings. This year alone, in January alone, we had about 27 mass shootings. And as usual, they use women, to borrow a word from a recent hearing, they use women as props. I was just reading that one of the objections to the legislation passed today, which would have extended the amount of time that the federal government gives for background checks, that one of the arguments against that, someone was trying to limit it, said, that we don't want to see victims of women who are victims of domestic violence have to wait that long.
To get a gun?
To get a gun.
What?
But they always use this, and this is the way the NRA markets guns to women. And they tell them it's protection against crime, when all the statistics show that if you buy a gun, you are more likely to be killed by a gunfire than if not. So in fact, it is not true that it protects them. Buying a gun actually puts you in harm's way. So that's, I'm excited because this is a real emergency, and finally we see our elected officials trying to move in the right direction. Now it's only the House of Representatives, we're talking about the US. But it's a good start. It's a good start for the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and all the young people who really pushed for this.
Yes.
That was amazing.
So yes, that's what I'm talking about. Listen to people. Be unapologetic, and that's what I've loved about the young advocates, gun control advocates. That's what I've loved about the women we've been seeing lately, is that people are just being unapologetic and bold about what they believe in.
Well, it's because they're not tied to the vested interests right now.
True.
And so if we can show politicians that there is real value in actually going back to your constituencies and listening to the public, maybe they won't need to take the money from the handful of gun manufacturers and defense contractors and others who are really the ones that have an interest in the spread of the weapons. It's so clear that that's what's been going on.
And also in terms of numbers, you were mentioning mass shootings this month, and I have other numbers. It's 1,200 deaths this year only, 2,000 injuries, 49 children shot, and 195 teenagers, and just this year.
This year.
So
2019.
Yes. So we have to actually look at numbers and look at the truth rather than just listen to the rhetoric that we've been listening to for so long. So
it's also, I think, my children had an incident of having a lockdown at their school. It was a false alarm, but the idea that in the last 10 years, it's become normal for schools to teach kindergartners that they have to go into lockdown mode. It is. It's unimaginable.
Absolutely.
It is. I mean, I think that when when my children were young, it didn't exist. It's a new phenomenon, and it's become normalized, and it's horrific.
I mean, as a professor,
Yeah.
I have to go through training if someone comes in with a gun.
Yes.
And what I'm supposed to do.
Yes.
And every one of us has to do it. And, you know, there's something insane about the kind of culture that we're in that just creates people who do this, you know, and we need to look at that pathology. It's like, what is it that we're doing as a society that creates people like this? And why is it that we're the only country in the world with this kind of insanity of gun violence? You know?
Well, I mean, the insanity may exist everywhere else, or the pathology.
That they don't have
That might. The issue is the access.
They don't have
it's
the
access. I mean, seriously, it is. And across Europe, you know, in Italy, people have guns for hunting, but there are really, really strict laws around where you keep the bullets, where is the gun, how you have to make sure that it's unloaded, and what the punitive measures, what the punishment is if you're not abiding by the law. So it's not that people in other countries hunting and these kinds of activities don't exist. Of course they exist, but they have really, really tight laws around access to guns, maintenance of guns. It's only in this country that you see this.
And as you were saying that earlier, it's about people who have vested interest in the sale of guns and firearms.
Absolutely.
I mean, even the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has been prevented in the past from looking at firearm deaths as a public health issue.
They've been blocked.
They have been blocked.
Exactly.
And this all ties back to money in politics and the corrupted aspect of our democracy, which ties big money to getting elected.
To getting elected.
And the other element that is fear. You know, they've been using this fear in order to sell this idea of we need guns to protect ourselves from others or the other. So fear is a factor that is playing a big role these days.
Yes.
Yeah, Andrea, it's now that you brought up the other, can we talk about the money that supposedly there's some emergency to build something somewhere and what that's about? What would you want the presidential candidates to say about the need for this?
So this manufactured emergency at the border, it's just so absurd, but it's so painful. You know, for the past 2 years, or even before that, of course, we've been hearing about just this fear and ignorance, and the promotion of this concept of, you know, we are these people who need to be protected from everyone else around the world. One, and the other one is, you know, walls don't work. They just don't work. They've never worked. People will find a way. We have to look at the reasons why people leave their homelands. They don't leave because they just want to take kind of, you know, go on an adventure. They leave because they are in dire conditions. And people will find a way. Life will find a way. And I've been telling people, when they go low, we fly. Like literally, we'll grow wings if we need to, you know, feed our children or, you know, find a peace that we can live a peaceful life. So it's painful. It's a wound. It's basically a wound. It feels like a wound.
And some of that crisis is because of U.S. foreign policy. You know, I mean, the reason why people are leaving is because of the leaders we've put in place that are creating this chaos. So to pretend that suddenly everyone from Honduras is suddenly walking thousands of miles, what did we do there, right? I mean, what was our role in? Well, it's
the flow of weapons into the region. It's the trade deals. It's been a systematic kind of, it's like, you know, digging up of the social fabric of those countries, the economics, the politics, and then saying, oh, why have they come here? It's absurd. The other thing which is interesting is that there was some research some years ago that showed that while it was easier for people to go across the border and back home, they didn't bring whole families, because you know, often the men could come and they would work and then they would go home and the families, you know. But the minute you make it more difficult and it becomes about separation, then of course people want to bring the entire family over. So borders and walls are absurd, and they end up having a sort of an impact that you don't even often realize in terms of uprooting communities and families. In a way.
And most of the undocumented people in this country flew over here and overstayed a visa.
Yes,
You know?
exactly.
I mean, that's the majority
Exactly.
of the
That-
people, not
Yes.
on a wall. You know.
And that brings me to the point I was just going to make. It feels like it's about fear, as you started about,
Absolutely,
Andrea.
yeah.
So it's not. There's no emergency, but I'm not even sure how much people in office are concerned about the issue of immigration. It's about creating this climate of fear and othering a segment in our society to distract people from
Exactly.
real bad policies that are being passed.
It's also kind of, again, I keep bringing it back to the vested interest, because so much of these issues, the security forces, the cages, the construction of it's all privatized.
Oh,
I mean, this
absolutely.
privatization
Yes.
of prisons and security forces and border guards and so means that there is profit to be made
Absolutely.
in the treatment of human beings, and it gets it's the layering of it in terms of they are bad and we need the security.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, if we had, whether it's 5 billion or 10 billion for this wall, if we put it into the host communities, into the cities and towns where people are migrating to, and said, you know what, as there's a flow of people coming in, we're going to think about your schools and your clinics and give, make it so that there's an incentive to embrace
Absolutely.
Yeah.
migrant workers or refugees, and we're not even
Yeah.
taking any more refugees, but actual political refugees. But if we could put the money to good use, as opposed to giving it to private companies who put men on the border, who are
Exactly.
putting children into cages. I
And-
mean,
well,
really,
and-
how do you
and-
go to
and
sleep
they
at
just
night?
had this
No, and the
hearing,
sexual
the
assault.
The sexual
exactly.
assault.
There was just a
It is, yeah.
report on the sexual assault. They knew
Of course,
that
yeah.
several of their employees at HHS at DHS, Department of Homeland Security, had been accused of sexual violence, and still they were putting children.
Yeah, and I mean that study that came out yesterday or
Yes.
something. I mean, it's huge numbers of children.
Yeah.
I mean,
That-
it's disgusting.
In addition to
absolutely
the children that they're misplacing
Yes.
or
Losing innocence.
losing, family separations, that the impact of separating children from their families, it's lifelong.
Yeah.
It's not something that you just do today and then it results a year from now. It's just lifelong, and it's going to impact our whole communities in a way that we cannot even see. It's really painful, and it's, I guess, the part about racism and against brown and black people coming
Absolutely.
in is just so clear to most of us. But this idea of fear and ignorance is just creates chaos.
It's fear,
Yeah,
ignorance, and
absolutely.
distraction. Because I
Distraction.
think
That's
that
exactly what
it's, we're afraid we definitely don't want to inform people. We want to distract them with whatever else we can, even the media, even the left-wing media, to me is a real problem, because you turn it on and if Fox is talking about Trump going to some event and they have their angle, or whatever, the Mueller investigations, MSNBC is doing the same thing from their angle, but this isn't actually news. It's news is what's happening on the borders. News is what's
Right.
happening around the country. We're not actually getting information out.
Right.
So it's distraction and sending people
distraction.
after
I mean,
wild
and
goose
it's
chases.
really, I totally agree with you about the media. Is that there's such a American-centric view
Yeah.
of the media that there's not a global attention, and then right now it's global.
Yeah, but it's
So-
not even. It's Washington centric. It's not even. It's not in America. I wish it was America centric. But
It's
you don't
not.
get on the news. You don't turn on the news and actually hear about what's happened in Oklahoma or Texas or.
It's
or
White
no.
House.
It's-
It's White House
Exactly.
centric.
Exactly.
White
White
House
House
centric.
centric.
Yeah.
It's entirely about
Yeah.
what's happening,
what's-
and it's not real news.
No.
There aren't every day. There isn't. Okay, yesterday Michael Cohen, speaks in
Right.
Congress, but it's not like every day you have big breaking news.
No.
But they just spin it,
Yeah.
and meanwhile they're not covering anything else.
Nothing else.
On the other hand, I think when we're talking about a wall, even if the wall is never built, the walls that are being built right now in terms of ignorance and misrepresentation and just misinformation are just they're as devastating as a physical wall.
Absolutely.
And walls between communities, just the fear of the other, the fear of somebody who's different. So it's we're in trouble.
Yeah,
It's
and
I'm
it
in
gives
trouble.
people a false sense of what makes them secure or
Mhm.
not. We're talking earlier, basically about a human rights vision of investing in social services, investing in things that actually build up communities. And that's what creates a secure community.
Absolutely, but that's, I think, where the fear is coming from, is that over the last 20 years, people have become so economically insecure
Yeah.
that it's easy to point to that brown person and say, that's why I don't have it, rather than point to the white person who took all that money from you.
They're being
You know,
directed.
they're
That's
being
part
directed
of
to
why
the-
there's all this distraction.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to ask you, Sanan, now that you said that we talk so much about Washington-centric, there's so many things happening globally right now. I mean, the failed talks on North Korea yesterday, and Iran, basically half the world. So if you could start us off on some of the kind of military issues, the sanctions, and then we can all jump in.
It's yes, the world is out there.
There
Things are
is-
happening.
there is-
Really?
Oh,
They're really- it's, you know, surprise, surprise. So a few kind of thoughts on this. Number one, what we are seeing is a really distressing and disheartening cabal of kind of U.S., Saudi, Israel with Netanyahu, although it'll be interesting because he's just been indicted for
Indicted, I
corruption,
saw
so it's going to
that.
be
Yes.
interesting whether he stays. But U.S., Saudi, Israel, and the UAE, the Emiratis, sort of trying to take control of the Middle East and how they want to perceive it. And within that context, they have an obsession with Iran. And you know, we can go into endless detail about what is wrong with the Iranian regime, but the fact that we have a country in the Middle East that has a population of 80 million people, that has been there for 2,500 years,
Yep.
that has, you know, its borders, and it borders countries that have levels of insecurity and violent extremism in them, and to be obsessed with trying to destroy this country. This is something that's really shocking, and this isn't just about regime. I mean, regime change we all know is code for war and other things, but what's happening vis-a-vis Iran is that they literally want to disintegrate it socially, politically, economically, and security-wise.
Why? Why do you think?
I see it in two different ways. I see that from the Saudi perspective, there's this animosity towards Iran. It's an ongoing animosity, but Iran rivals them in many ways. But whereas Iran comes with a deep cultural history and kind of a notion of a nation that is genuinely a nation with its multiple diversities and so forth, Saudi Arabia, I mean, it's King Saud, I mean, is named after a family, right? And it's been dominated by Wahhabism, which is a fringe, very intolerant sect of Sunni Islam. But over the last 40 years, with the help of the US, the Saudis have been able to spread it everywhere. So all of the kinds of problems that we see under the guise of terrorism that this sort of has a cloak of it, supposedly
Yeah.
Islam, it's not really, it's actually from that fringe. I mean, it's 9/11 gone global, right? So the Saudis have this problem. The Israelis, of course, have their problem with Iran. Again, on the one hand, the Iranian rhetoric doesn't help, but what's interesting is that it's a mutually beneficial sort of animosity from the hardliners in Iran and the hardliners in Israel. If Israel didn't have Iran to deal with, they would have to face the Palestinian problem. So every time there's an issue with Palestine, they lob it towards Iran.
Distraction, yes.
Yeah. The Emiratis have gotten into this game and they're basically acquiring also like ports and kind of spreading, even though they're small, but they're spreading their influence across the region. And so it's very, very dangerous, the game, because it's increased instability.
Yeah.
And as we're looking at it, it relates to Afghanistan. So right now what's happening, just earlier this week, the US government had direct talks with the Taliban,
Right.
without the Afghan government present, without women present, without anybody else present. So we have an elected government in Afghanistan, and they are not involved in the peace talks. It's absurd.
It's insane.
It's absurd.
And the U.S. created the Taliban.
The U.S. enabled the Taliban to and what they've done is that the Taliban has been supported by Pakistan over the years because of the India issues, because it's like having, trying to sort of be a bulwark against India. But but now Saudi Arabia has been brought in to pay off Pakistan's debt And so Saudi influence is again going to go on the rise over there. I mean, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So it's a very dark clouds kind of arising and emerging in the Middle East, which it's the last thing it needs. We have sold so many weapons.
Exactly. I was just
and
gonna
33% of the sort of the weaponry that the U.S. sell, it goes directly just into the Middle East region. So they don't need the weapons. They don't. And the weapons go into the hands of, ISIS and.
Absolutely. They're all shooting each other with our guns.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they're not shooting each other. They're actually shooting civilians.
Yeah.
So 30%, so 90% of the casualties of the wars that we see are civilians. Of them, 30% are children. So basically, we're just killing our future. Literally, we are killing the future.
So,
And the gun lobby.
So we were talking about advisors. What would you advise the next leaders, president of the United States,
On foreign policy?
Foreign policy vis-a-vis the Middle East?
So Bill Clinton at one point said that whatever is wrong in America can be fixed with whatever is right in America, which is, I think, a really nice, that we have so many good things that have come out of this country, right? Yeah. If only we could apply them and sort out the problem. It's the same with foreign policy. I mean, I think, number one, don't go and tell the Middle East that, we have our values of human rights and you don't have yours. Human rights started in the Middle East. The Cyrus cylinder, which comes from Iran, is 2,500 years old and talks about the idea that the state is there, but people should practice their own religion. So secularism. It's like don't start this division of us and them, our values and your values, and you don't deserve. Don't sell them all these weapons. Don't prop up dictators.
Yeah.
I mean, we have been systematically, on the one hand, we say, well, we used to say we care about human rights, but even when we had,
except when it's Saudi Arabia.
Well, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey,
but Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, exactly. Saudi Arabia, we won't touch them at all.
We're never gonna. They killed Khashoggi. But how many women have been disappeared in the last five months?
Women
in the
are
last 5 months have been disappeared. Who wrote reports on women's rights, and that mum's the word. We don't. I mean, even the left media. Won't even say anything. I mean, they're being tortured. Yeah. So we can't.
It's sort of the hypocrisy and the double standards. They don't hate us because of our values. They hate us because we're killing their kids. That's the
exactly.
We're involved in extracting minerals from we're polluting rivers and waters and things like that. And it's interesting because people will say, well, if we don't do it, if we don't sell the guns, if we don't do the mining or the extraction, then China and Russia will, right? And this, to me, is the race to the bottom. It's like the race towards moral inferiority. And
absolutely,
it is such a dangerous game. I mean, to compare yourselves with some of the worst, human rights abuses in the world, and just say, oh, just because they do it, we do it too. That's not what the U.S. should be about. So I would say, we should be reclaiming, or the U.S. should be kind of reducing its weaponry and exploitation around the world and elevating its soft power, which used to be the way it actually won friends and allies.
Yeah.
But I would say that, it did, but they've always been problems.
Of course.
There's never been a really great period of U.S. foreign policy.
No, that's true. There have been moments
there have been a few moments, then there's a coup over there, and then you assassinate elected leader over there, and
invasion over there.
Invasion over here.
And the U.S. has always used human rights and, for the most part, human rights and democracy as a pretext to invade.
To ruin people's human rights and democracy.
Exactly. And exploit their resources.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But if you take it and you say, actually, these are our values and we're going to live by them, that would change the world.
Absolutely.
Entirely.
And I would love to see that leader elected.
Yes.
In the candidates that are coming up.
Yes.
In this thing, I want to talk a little bit in terms of our advisor role now that we're official advisors and presidential candidates, right. And pay a little attention to sort of the economics. What is it that we want them to talk about economically? And it has to do with foreign policy. I mean, it's not disconnected. It's about is the oil industry the one that is going to control our economic policy making? And a couple, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I was going to talk about the tax, the new tax legislation, and it's tax season. And
I mean,
I'd love to hear what you think about.
I mean, you know, this tax cut that was passed through Congress is bankrupting the government.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is an agenda to shrink government, and you know, and the Republicans are basically saying, you know, we're going to cut Medicare, cut Social Security, basically get rid of the social welfare role of the state by shrinking the state. And the people who got the tax cuts don't need them, you know?
But it's even more dangerous than that, because what we're seeing, and again, when I look at around the world and think about, you know, 40 years of structural adjustment policies that forced countries to shrink their ability to provide education or health, is that people still need those services, right? And so if the government is not the one that's providing it and moderating that space, somebody else will come in. And typically it's going to be ideological groups who want to recruit. So if the Catholic Church has taken over the poverty agenda in Latin America, it comes with rules about reproductive health care and so forth. If you know, Hezbollah is providing free clinics to Muslims or Shias in Lebanon, well, you know, then of course they're going to win in the elections, and there's an ideological pull and push. And what happens is that, given we're living in these very in the age of extreme pluralism, in the sense that we're all different, you know, diversities of ethnicity and race and religion living together, if you don't have the state sort of weaving the social cohesion through the provision of services, and it becomes divided based on your identity, our entire social fabric is going to be kind of shredded apart.
Absolutely,
and that's dangerous.
No, and you know, the agenda, the kind of libertarian agenda of shrinking the state, is global. You know, when companies are richer than countries, how are countries going to negotiate power? And you know, what is it? I think the most recent is that 26 people own the same wealth as half the world's population. That level of inequality is the worst we've seen since the Great Depression. And so, and that's global. It's global. There's that billionaire, you know, in India, they're in the US, they're in Mexico, and they are shrinking that role. And now the answer is public-private partnerships. You know, the private sector is better at doing this than the public. And, you know, prisons, all of the stuff is with no proof. There is no proof.
It's really rhetoric.
It's rhetoric.
But we see, you know, it's interesting to see living where I live in Washington. So you get they get a job at the government. They get their security clearance after some point, depending on what they're doing. Once they have security clearance, it's not just tied to that job, the time frame of the job. They have security clearance, basically, that can be taken from a government job to the private sector. So the private sector can hire them, charge for the same work, they charge more to the government, right? And then they call it shrinking government. It's like, no, this person, if they were working for the government, they would be paid half the amount, and they would be doing the job properly with loyalty to the state, not to some private company.
Yeah.
But this is what it's
the revolving door
called.
to the private sector. So one thing I wanted to say, again, we're giving candidates advice. One of the new policies that have come out recently in terms of economic policy is the Green New Deal. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who we all love, has been talking about it, and I think we're going to see a clip of what she has to say, and then we can talk about that as a new prospect.
I think that today is not just a big day for us as a delegation, us as a party, us as a movement, but this is a big day for activists all over the country and for frontline communities all over the country. Today is a big day for people who have been left behind. Today is a big day for workers in Appalachia. Today is a big day for children that have been breathing dirty air in the South Bronx. Today is a really good day for families who have been enduring the injustices of drinking dirty water, or who have seen their living rooms being flooded in with the waves of rising sea levels. And today, I think, is a really big day for our economy, the labor movement, the social justice movement, indigenous peoples, and people all over the United States of America. Because today is the day that we truly embark on a comprehensive agenda of economic, social, and racial justice in the United States of America. That's right. That's what this agenda is all about. Because climate change and our environmental challenges are one of the biggest existential threats to our way of life, not just as a nation, but as a world. And in order for us to combat that threat, we must be as ambitious and innovative in our solution as possible. So what we are doing today, and in introducing these resolutions here today, is that it's not a bill. It is a resolution. And what this resolution is doing is saying this is our first step. Our first step is to define the problem and define the scope of the solution. And so we're here to say that small, incremental policy solutions are not enough. They can be part of a solution, but they are not the solution unto itself. There is no justice and there is no combating climate change without addressing what has happened to indigenous communities. That means that there is no fixing our economy without addressing the racial wealth gap. That means that we are not going to transition to renewable energies without also transitioning frontline communities and coal communities into economic opportunity as well. That is what this is about. It is comprehensive, it is thoughtful, it is compassionate, and it is extremely economically strategic as well. Today is also the day that we choose to assert ourselves as a global leader in transitioning to 100% renewable energy and charting that path. That means that we are not going to peg ourselves by the lowest standards of other nations. It doesn't mean that we're going to say, what about them? They're not doing it. What about them? They're not doing it. Why should we? We should do it because we should lead. We should do it because that is what this nation is about. We should do it because we are a country founded on ideals of a culture that is innovative, that cares for our brothers and sisters across this country. We should do it because we are an example to the world. That is.
Okay, the Green New Deal. What do we think about it? I'll start us off a little bit. I mean, you know, we need something to happen in this country. And as I said, the inequality has just gotten worse and worse. If you look at, for example, increases in income and wealth across different classes, it's really the 0.01% that has just skyrocketed, right? And then the 0.1% is going up. And then you see even the 5% is going, but still kind of stagnant. And then everyone else has been stagnant for 25 years. And there's, you know, people have 3 jobs in order to, and are in the poverty line. You know, I mean, it's insane what we've done. The levels of unemployment, the insecurity, all of that is why Trump is president. You know, is people are really scared. And I think one of the really interesting things about reading on the Green New Deal is that it is a job creation mechanism that can be done by government, like we did during the New Deal after the Great Depression. And we can do it in terms of building infrastructure and as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has said, we have a real problem of climate change. And so the Green New Deal is really a job creation. I mean, obviously, if we stop and reduce dependence on fossil fuel, we will lose some jobs there, but this will increase jobs. And if they're government jobs, they might actually get paid a living wage. And if we want race and gender equity, and if they're government jobs, they can actually prioritize who they hire in minority-owned firms. And for the world, we have to deal with climate change. I mean, we're gonna kill the place that hosts us, so quickly.
You know what
Ejim,
I
go
love
ahead.
about it is, I love the fact that she has put it on the radar, on the agenda. We've been talking about climate change, but really more in civil society. And the politicians talking about it were people who are denying it. Now we have elected officials leading the way, and I love the idea of it. It's bold. Like you said, it's the New Deal. We're talking about, as she said, 100% renewable energy in 10 years. I mean, that is bold. It's pulling the Democratic Party to the left where they should be.
Yeah. And
It's forcing them to take a position.
And the proposal for the Green New Deal has been around. I mean, there's been economists, colleagues of mine who worked on it. What she did is she brought it out into the open.
Yes,
and
on the legislative agenda, and she's forcing them to take a position on it.
Absolutely.
And she, as so many people in this country are, particularly frontline communities, they're educated on these issues, and we've done it before. And she keeps making this point: we have money. We were just talking about money for a wall. We talk about money for wars. We have money when it comes to things that the government, that people in power prioritize. They need to prioritize this, saving our planet for our children, for us when we get older. I mean, so I love the boldness of it. I love what it's doing for the Democratic Party, and I love that it's so closely linked to what people on the ground want, which is another this is really a misunderstanding, or like bad information that's put out there, is that people don't want these basic things, that we don't want to do something about climate change, that we don't want to do something about gun control, that we don't want living wages. Those are all lies, in fact, and they're not based in fact
It's also
or the data.
it's also interesting for me because it's really a recognition of in the next generation that's coming on, and for them, again, climate change is very, very real, and it's a real concern. It's so to have the conversation. I don't even want to talk about it in terms of left and right anymore, because it's all of us, right? It's so absurd that we would.
You're right.
We would be thinking that, oh, this is, we take it to the left and it's only going to benefit certain. No, this is, it doesn't matter whether you're the child of a billionaire or the child of
climate change is going to get you.
It's going to get you. And what's interesting, and if we think about the totality of the sort of the foreign policy, is that we've forgotten what we are for. Right, we've lost. It's sort of, whether it's the last 40 years of economic policies, or the last 18 years of security policies, which has taken us into the war on terror. We're constantly good at stating what we are against.
Yes.
But what are we for, folks? And this conversation, whether it's the Green Deal or whether it's progressive foreign policy, it's really to say we want to articulate a vision and a destination. It's like a blueprint that we want. And my analogy is it's a little bit like saying we're renovating an old house. There are parts of the house that we're going to keep because they're beautiful. There are parts of the house that need to be shaken up and changed. But we have a vision of what the house is going to look like. Right now, it's been gouged, and it's like we've rented out the rooms to people that have trashed it, basically.
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, my next book project, which I have a title for, but I haven't done much work on it, is what's the economy for?
Yeah.
It's a very basic question, right? It's a very basic question. What's the economy for? And when I ask it, people look at me like, what? What do you mean? And I said, well, what's its purpose? We all participate in it. Is there a purpose? Is it supposed to provide us a certain kind of standard of living? Is it Is it only to buy some more shoes? Is it for that very 1%, 0.01%, to those 26 people to own half the wealth of the world? And the work I've been doing is really saying, okay, what if we change that? I mean, there's so much discussion in the in this country about am I a capitalist or a socialist. And I think it's, to me, I think it's kind of a waste of time because I don't think anyone understands what either of those words really mean in 2019, you know? But what I've been saying is, what if we say, go back and we talked about human rights, what if we say that the economy's purpose, and we judge it not by how much the GDP is, but by how it fulfills basic human rights, like adequate standard of living, your right to work, the right to health, the right to food. And if we have a way of measuring and saying, hey, this economy is doing really well because people are fed, they're going to school, there's gender equity, there's not discrimination, and then we judge the economy based on that. And guess what? There's actually international human rights norms that we can use to do it. You know, so we don't have to make it up. It's just, and what you said, Sanan, and then I'll stop, is that what is the role of government? Well, is to ensure that those things happen. So where are they? They all signed the UDHR. Their job is supposed to make sure that we're all okay, and they've given it up to someone else.
It's in my line of work, we have the same thing, which is, what is security for? Who is it for? How do you define? How would you define security for you, for your family, for your community, for your nation? And so I call it democratizing the security debate, because of course national security is one of those things that they leave, it's very Wizard of Ozzy, God forbid the rest of us actually, push the curtain back and see what rubbish is going on behind. It's the same with economics. It's like, if we democratize the debate and enable people to participate, it will change what the outcomes are and where the priorities should be. And that's really what we should be moving towards, I think. Yeah.
And I think we have to democratize the debate. It's about survival. It's not going to be optional. It's just going to be about survival.
But it's, I agree. And, one of the things I was saying earlier that excites me about these newly elected women in particular in Congress is how grounded their positions are in people and in people's realities. I think the problem that we've had and that we need to change if we are democratizing the debate, be it vis-a-vis security or the economy or anything else, is that the people who control the story are the people we need to tackle. We need to tackle mass media.
Yeah.
I mean, the perspective that is so often centered in any story we read, the majority of the time, the perspective that's centered is that of a wealthy white man.
Not us.
Not us.
Except for MNN.
Not the majority of people.
But again, it's the good news piece of this is that if you look at, and if you think about it in terms of feminism and where women's role in society, if we look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg generation, they were pushing in to try and get a slot at the, in universities.
Yeah. Yes.
They opened that door. Hillary Clinton's generation, the door was open, they wanted, but they got in, but they were so desperate and so sort of under so much pressure to just be like the men, right? That they actually stripped the feminism just became about being like the others. Yeah. My generation, we were like, well, we're in there, wait a second, we want to change things from inside because you have to be in those spaces to have radical change from within. This generation, and I saw it with the kids from Florida over gun control, is that social media, they have a platform.
Yes.
They don't need to be inside the room to make the changes and to have a voice. They can use these alternative ways to change the debate. And again, with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that's what she's done. She's using social media. So she puts in, and it's where these two come together that we really need to focus. That how do you get the issues out into the public space, and then what are the strategies to genuinely get it locked down into law and policy and into the institutional spaces that are still blocked away from us.
And I agree. I think that this generation has used social media so brilliantly, but we want that debate to also happen, like this debate is happening in spaces like this, in your regular old-fashioned, if you will, but your regular networks, right?
Yes.
Your regular media, because this is where you can have the meatier conversation. This is where you will have the press release or the press conference about the release of the resolution on the New Deal. That's where you get the meat. And what I love about this show and our conversation is that we are bringing another perspective. We are bringing a perspective that's closer to where the majority of the people are.
Yeah.
You said earlier that you want to move away from left and right. I couldn't agree more, because really what has become known as radical politics is really what more people want than not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, who does not want a decent job?
They just pass
Exactly.
You know, who doesn't want a decent job? And when you say that, oh, you know, you can't, you know, the tax policies will get rid of the, I'm like, really? $15 an hour is going to make something, but your bonuses didn't do anything?
Exactly.
I mean, the entire conversation about, you know, and you know, from I think the show we did last year or something, I showed that from 1947 to 1979, we had shared prosperity in this country with a certain kind of economic policies. And then 1980, Ronald Reagan got elected, and the flip in terms of inequality is very particular neoliberal economic policies. We need to change that. We have to figure out a way to change, and not just nationally, but we need to do it globally, because
We've spread this stuff globally.
and look at all these right-wing horrible governments getting elected. You know, we're Poland, Hungary. I mean, Mexico is our one little, you know,
Hope.
Lopez Obrador, and trying to do something. But we really do have to worry globally that we're in a bit of a crisis.
And we have to remind people that in this country, people forget that before the 1980s, you went to a public university, 80% of the fees were covered by the state, and maybe students pay 20%. Now it's the reverse, right? It's 80% are student, and 20% maybe they get funded.
I would not have a college degree if I went to school anytime. I mean, I went in the 70s when, you know, I could work my job and go to school.
It just doesn't make any sense. The most powerful country in the world doesn't have free education. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yes, one of the richest economy in the world. But you know, I'm excited. I've been excited this week. There's a gun control legislation, then there's Medicare for all that's been introduced. Again, something that we should take for granted. Talk about in a country like the United States, you should take for granted that we can all access health care.
Basic
health care. But we're the only industrialized country that does not have access to health care. It's so expensive. It's getting more and more expensive.
It's insane.
And even though this is something that's affecting the majority of Americans, somehow the rhetoric around it is controlled.
Yeah. Oh,
by
if you
a few
get the
people.
Canadian system, you might have to wait for
By
a checkup.
people who
I'm like,
have good quality health care.
no, but they say, oh, if you go there, I've heard that you have to wait, and I was like, but you don't have health insurance.
Right.
Like, what would you rather wait for something or have it? You know,
I
like,
think
come on.
it sometimes gets confused, health care and health insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
We need health care for everyone.
Absolutely.
Health insurance, you know, the corporations come in and it's privatized and it's just...
I mean, that was one of the failures. I mean, as much as I was very happy about President Obama doing the healthcare overhaul, but the biggest problem is he just handed it to the insurance companies, you know, and not have a single payer
And it's
system,
very expensive.
which is what we need.
And
Medicare
it is
for all.
And you know, as somebody who runs an organization and provides healthcare, I can tell you it's extremely expensive.
And it gets more and more expensive every year.
Yes.
It doesn't. The costs don't go down. And if you're small, you don't have much bargaining power.
Yeah.
So really, and even under the Affordable Care Act,
it's
the premiums have gotten really
Insane.
expensive,
Yeah.
and they don't cover much.
No, that's
you
right.
know,
That's
so you almost get it in the same way that certain insurance policies, like your travel insurance policy, you buy and expect that it probably won't cover you if you need it.
You know, it's interesting because to me sometimes I think that the corporate, not all of them, because I think there's also a shift in the corporate world around some of these issues and recognizing the importance of doing social good. So certain companies are doing that, but the idea that at the end of the day there is a sector of this society that doesn't want its children, or certain of its children, certain other sectors, educated enough, right? They actually want people to be semi-literate so that they can pay them the $10 or the $15. We have to actually address that issue because there is no reason why there shouldn't be decent education, K through 12, for every kid in this country. And yet it's almost deliberately that you see in pockets in urban areas and so forth that they are graduating children that can barely write a full paragraph.
Then there was just a report that came out, I think yesterday, showing that children who are in majority white schools get 23 million, I want to say. It could be billion. But I think it's 23 million more than children who are in majority non-white schools in this country.
And that has a lot to do with education being funded by property taxes.
By education, yes, and no way to fill it in, like no way for federal government to supplement it adequately.
And it's also, again, one of the things that I've observed in Washington, which is one of the, I mean, you think in the nation's capital, the fact that we are so down on the rankings in terms of public education, but it's that even when they say they're spending money on education, when you look at it, it's basically construction, and and the money actually is going to the construction companies, and it's not teachers. It's not the soft. Again, it's not the soft wiring. It's the hard wiring. I think it's lovely to have a beautiful building, but again, if you look around the world, it's not the building that makes the kids. It's the teachers and the
teachers are having to drive around Ubers to pay their rent.
That's right.
I mean, that's insane when, the most important job in the world is a teacher. And they don't get paid enough to pay their rent and food. I mean, that's a little ridiculous that we're in there. So let's think about what are there any issues that you can think of that you want the next presidential candidates to think about as we
I would sort of categorize it in different ways. I will say, number one, clarify what's your vision and what are we for, and be bold. Be bold about it. This is not left or right. This is really about refinding a direction of where we want to be, and listen to people. I think one of the biggest failures of the last round elections, 2016, was that the Democratic Party was not interested in actually listening to people. The candidates, and I think that we have to be very careful about that, because if you're not listening to what your own constituency is saying, and you become so limited in a little circle, you're going to go down the wrong pathway, and it's not a done deal, because Mr. Trump has over 40% support still.
It's far from a done deal, and just piggybacking off of that, I would say, get rid of your inner circle. I think what these candidates do is that they surround themselves by experts who serve as buffers between them and real people, and so they stop hearing what real people care about, because they're listening to their experts, who are often paid experts, who are not that close to the majority of people. They're not really that close to working people. So I think that they should find ways of breaking through the wall of their inner circles, because that's how they'll hear people.
I mean, this idea of that the market will fix things. It's they base politics on focus groups. Like they're trying to sell Coca-Cola. They just say, "Hey, what will people vote for? Oh, then we'll say that." And I think that idea of the marketization of ideas is the problem, and that what do we stand for? I mean, stand up and say what you believe in. Not what you think people want to hear. Andrea, I'm sorry.
Propaganda. So that is basically propaganda. I would say, just really simple, just build bridges, not walls. Just focus on bridges in all kinds of contexts, and speak truth. I mean, honor the truth, speak the truth, like, false, fake news, misrepresentations. We have to just step away from that and be creative, not destructive.
Yeah, that's right.
Just creativity.
I would just on the expertise point, I would say we need to balance, because the idea that everybody can have their opinion on everything, and their opinion is of equal weight to the person who's been doing the work for 20 years or doing the research, that's also a problem, right? There's a level of expertise, But if they're political advisors that don't necessarily, that are generalists in a campaign context, absolutely. But
those are their inner circle. I mean, the Hillary Clinton campaign spent most of their money was spent on rich white men who were consultants. And a very small amount of that money actually went to communities of color that have been stalwart supporters of that campaign.
Yeah.
Now,
No, I mean, and
if she
also-
had been talking to those people, she would have had a better sense of how to invest her resources.
And these two big programs, Medicare for All and Green New Deal, have been
Yeah.
around for a while,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, and I'm very happy that a lot of progressive economists have put a lot of work into measuring it,
Absolutely.
coming up with the numbers, but it's been around, but this new group pulled it out of the shelves and stuck it into
And here's the thing.
menu.
I remember in 2016 I got an invitation to attend a tea party at somebody's home for the bargain basement price of $1,000 to listen to Hillary Clinton's, I don't know, something or other advice, supposed national security, that this is the man who's going to be the national security advisor. And I was not interested in going and listening, because I'm like, we've heard it all before. What I did was I said, I'm happy to host the tea at my house
Good job.
for free.
Good job.
And you guys come, and I will bring a bunch of people for you to listen to them, right? So again, all these,
Absolutely.
of course they didn't listen. So,
Sorry.
but this idea that you need to keep raising money for your elections campaign, no. If you listen to people, they'll actually help you.
I'll help you.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things I want to close out our show with is to say, please listen to feminists. It's International Women's Day, and even though it's just one day, you should listen to us 365 days of the year. And I think we're in a new place where the word feminism is not a bad word anymore. And we have a lot of people around the world who are pushing that agenda, and let's hope that feminists can change the world a little bit more, because the other side has done a really bad job so far. Thank you.